The road goes straight for so long, you start to wonder if you're moving at all. Flat land on every side. The sky here is enormous. Not the city kind, where you catch a patch between buildings, but the kind that makes you feel like the world forgot to put walls up. There's a grain elevator on the horizon, a gas station, not much else. The GPS says 11 minutes to your destination. You check the listing on your phone one more time. 3 bedrooms, detached garage, full basement, corner lot, listed at $34,900. And before we get through all 12 towns on this list, I need to tell you about one Saskatchewan community where a 3-bedroom house sold at a municipal tax auction for $9,200. Less than a used pickup truck, less than what people in Toronto spend on first and last month's rent. This is rural Canada, and the prices are not what you think they are.
Number 12, Foam Lake, Saskatchewan. Foam Lake sits 183 kilometers northeast of Saskatoon, on the eastern edge of the Boreal Transition Zone, where the open prairie starts giving way to poplar stands and scrubland and the first hints of northern forest. Population? Approximately 1,150. The median residential sale price in 2023 was $38,500. Let that number sit. $38,500. For context, the average Canadian home now costs $685,000. In Vancouver, $38,500 doesn't buy you a parking stall. In Toronto, it doesn't cover a year's rent on a 1-bedroom. In Foam Lake, it buys you the house, the garage, the yard, and occasionally the furniture the last owner left behind because it wasn't worth hauling to Saskatoon.
The town was incorporated in 1912, built entirely on the wheat economy that shaped the entire Prairie West. For decades, it worked. Grain prices held steady, the elevators stayed open, the hardware store stayed open, the school stayed open, and Foam Lake functioned exactly as the government planners who drew its township lines intended. Then, 3 things happened in rapid succession. The 1980s farm crisis collapsed wheat prices across the board. The federal government dismantled the crow rate subsidy in 1995, a freight policy that had made it economical to ship prairie grain east to the ports. And grain companies began quietly rationalizing which country elevators were worth keeping. Foam Lakes went dark. The school went through its first round of consolidation. Then the young people, doing the arithmetic their parents had done for them, left for Saskatoon, Edmonton, and Calgary.
Between 1981 and 2021, Foam Lake lost 31% of its population. In a town that started at 1,670, that's roughly 520 people who simply did not stay. One longtime resident told a regional newspaper, "The hardest part isn't the quiet. It's watching the houses go dark one by one and knowing there's no one coming to turn the lights back on." Here's the narrative turn, though. Foam Lake still has a functioning grocery store, a credit union, a library, and a K-12 school with enough enrollment to stay viable, all of which are things that dozens of Saskatchewan towns half its size have already surrendered. There are 2 lakes within 15 minutes of downtown. In summer, Saskatoon families drive 2 hours to spend a weekend on those lakes, and they spend money in Foam Lake's businesses that local residents alone could not sustain. Number 11, GLASLYN, Saskatchewan. GLASLYN is smaller, population 430, situated 270 kilometers northwest of Saskatoon on Highway 3, the old road that carried homesteaders north through the Boreal Fringe in the early 1900s, when the better southern land was already taken. Average residential sale price, $27,800. The town was founded in 1912 by Welsh settlers who had followed the homesteading advertisements from Britain with the earnest optimism of people who had nothing to lose by trying. They chose the name GLASLYN, from the Welsh for Blue Lake. They built a church first, then a community hall, then a school. That order of priorities tells you everything about what they valued. By 2023, 2 of those 3 original buildings are gone. The narrative turn is precise.
GLASLYN lost its school in 2014 when the provincial government's rural consolidation plan identified it as below the enrollment threshold needed to justify operation. At the time of closure, 47 students were enrolled. The building was demolished the following year. What looks on paper like an administrative decision about operational efficiency is, in practice, something else entirely. When a school closes in a town of 430 people, it removes the one institution that gives young families a reason to stay. You can work a farm without a school in your town.
A Reddit user in a Saskatchewan community forum wrote, "My parents bought their house in GLASLYN for $18,000 in 2009. They sold it for $24,000 in 2021. In 12 years, they made $6,000 on a house. In that same window, their cousins in Saskatoon made $180,000 on theirs. Same province, different universe." The cruel irony, and it is genuinely cruel, the Welsh settlers who named this place after a blue lake chose the name because this corner of Saskatchewan reminded them of the Welsh countryside. What they built here, the wheat economy, the community hall, the church, the pride in a place, mirrored exactly what they had left behind in Wales. And Wales has spent the last century watching its small rural communities empty out as cities absorb the young and the ambitious. The settlers left one disappearing world and built another one on the same template, and the disappearing followed them across the Atlantic.
Number 10, Coronation, Alberta. Cross the provincial border and the logo on the grain elevators changes. The story does not. Coronation, Alberta. 1,100 residents, 330 kilometers southeast of Edmonton, sitting in the zone the province officially designates as the Special Areas. A term that sounds like a bureaucratic euphemism, but is in this case completely literal. This entire region of East Central Alberta was so systematically devastated by the Dust Bowl of the 1930s that the provincial government effectively placed it into administrative receivership. The Special Areas Board, created in 1938, still manages the land today, nearly 90 years later, because the region never recovered sufficiently to govern itself in the conventional sense. Average house price in Coronation? $52,000. The Dust Bowl hit this region harder than almost anywhere in Canada. Between 1931 and 1941, the population of the surrounding special areas dropped by 40% as families abandoned farms that would no longer produce food. Topsoil that had accumulated over 10,000 years blew east in a single decade. A local elder quoted in a 2019 historical archive said, "My grandmother remembered the sky going black at noon, black like night. She said you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and everybody just packed what fit in the truck and left." Coronation never recovered its pre-Dust Bowl numbers, but it didn't collapse either. The narrative turn is oil. The Provost oil field, a vast, sprawling formation that stretches across the region, gave Coronation a second economic identity. For decades, oilfield service work sustained the town when grain farming could not. But oil is cyclical in a way that wheat, for all its fragility, is not. When prices crashed in 2015, Coronation lost roughly 200 residents within 24 months. When prices partially recovered, some returned. Number 9. MACKLIN, Saskatchewan. Back across the border, 290 kilometers west of Saskatoon, right on the Alberta boundary, MACKLIN, Saskatchewan. Population, 1,400. Average house price, $44,500. MACKLIN survives on two things: agriculture and the largest concentration of Ukrainian Canadians per capita in Saskatchewan, a community whose cultural weight has kept this town alive in ways that pure economic logic would not predict. The Ukrainian settlers arrived beginning in 1905, following Clifford Sifton's federal immigration campaign that specifically targeted Eastern Europeans for prairie homesteading on the grounds that they were, in his recorded words, stalwart peasants in sheepskin coats who wouldn't flinch at hard conditions. The campaign was explicitly paternalistic, and the framing was openly ethnic. It was also, by the government's own land settlement metrics, extraordinarily effective. More than 170,000 Ukrainians emigrated to Canada between 1891 and 1914. Today, over 1.3 million Canadians claim Ukrainian ancestry, making it the third largest ethnic origin in the country. The narrative turn in Macklin is cultural rather than economic. The town holds an annual festival anchored by a giant decorative pisanka, a Ukrainian Easter egg, that draws over 12,000 visitors each summer to a community of 1,400 people, 9 visitors per resident. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church has been holding liturgy since 1911. The Cultural Museum receives government arts funding that would be unthinkably small in an urban context, but is genuinely sustaining here. Heritage has become an industry in the way grain used to be.
One woman, interviewed by a CBC regional affiliate, said, "People ask me why I don't just move to Saskatoon. And I tell them, who keeps this alive if we all go? Who's there for the church, for the Easter egg?" She paused, then added, "Someone has to stay. Might as well be me." Macklin is not cheap because it is dying. It is cheap because it is small and far from anywhere. And in Canada's housing market, those two facts overwhelm everything else, including a cultural vitality that would be considered an asset in any other context. Number 8. ROBLIN, Manitoba. Population 1,800. Situated 375 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, near the Saskatchewan border, at the edge of the Parkland region, where the flat prairie breaks into rolling lake country. Average house price, $65,000.
ROBLIN is the most expensive entry on this list. Let that recalibrate your sense of scale. It's also the most intact. ROBLIN has a full functioning hospital, a grocery store, a pharmacy, a Canadian Tire, a bowling alley that has been operating since 1961, which in the context of small-town Manitoba is roughly the equivalent of an ancient ruin. These are not amenities you can assume in rural Canada. These are things that towns of this size fight to keep, often lose, and occasionally get back through sheer organized stubbornness. Which brings us to the narrative turn. In 2017, Manitoba Health floated a rural consolidation plan that would have downgraded or closed 22 rural health facilities across the province. ROBLIN's hospital was on the list. What followed was one of those moments of collective defiance that rural towns occasionally produce. 1,800 people sent 1,800 letters to their MLA.
A retiree from Ontario who had relocated to ROBLIN wrote in a small-town living Facebook group, "People think ROBLIN is the middle of nowhere. It has everything I need and nothing I don't. I paid $62,000 for a 4-bedroom house in 2018. My mortgage is paid off. I worked until 62 instead of 72. You do the math." The trade-off: $65,000 buys a house and a functional, quiet life. It does not buy proximity to a university, a professional sports arena, a major hospital with surgical subspecialties, or the kind of labor market that accommodates career changes. For people at certain life stages, retired, remote working, or simply done with the density, that trade-off is precisely the point. Number 7. Spiritwood, Saskatchewan. Population 890. Located 230 kilometers northwest of Saskatoon in the forest fringe. That specific band of Saskatchewan where the open prairie ends and the boreal begins, where you can drive 10 minutes and go from wheat fields to poplar stands to the edge of a lake nobody south of Prince Albert has ever heard of. Average house price, $31,500. The town exists because of homesteaders who pushed north when the better southern land was already claimed. By 1928, Spiritwood had a hotel, 3 grain elevators, 2 churches, and a weekly newspaper. It was, briefly, a place in the process of becoming something larger. The narrative turn is geographic and structural. The boreal fringe that makes the region beautiful also makes large-scale grain farming genuinely difficult. The soils are thinner. The growing season is shorter, by 3 to 4 weeks compared to the southern prairies. When the grain economy mechanized through the 1950s and 1960s, farms consolidated and needed fewer human beings to operate. The seasonal workers and small operators Spiritwood depended on were the first to go. Why do people stay? It's worth asking. A farmer named Keith profiled in a 2021 MACKLIN's article on prairie depopulation, put it directly. I grew up here, my kids grew up here, my grandkids are growing up here. There is nothing wrong with this place. The jobs are farming and a bit of forestry and whatever side business you can put together. That has always been true. The question is whether that's enough for you. For me, it is. For $31,500, you get a house in a community that still has a school, a hockey rink, a curling club, and a lake that is not shared with 100,000 other people on a long weekend. Whether that is enough depends entirely on what you needed in the first place.
Number 6. Provost, Alberta. Provost, Alberta, population 2,000, 280 kilometers southeast of Edmonton at the junction of highways 13 and 41. Average house price, $70,000. On this list, that makes Provost look almost expensive. In the context of Canada's national housing market, it remains extraordinary. Provost is an oil town wearing farm clothes. The Provost oil field, discovered in 1955, is one of the longest continuously producing petroleum formations in Alberta, with over 5,000 wells drilled across the regional play since its discovery. The oil here is heavy, slow-moving, and cheap to extract. Not headline-making like the oil sands, not technically complex like some deep-water analog. It simply produces, year after year, at the kind of low-drama consistency that keeps an oil field service economy running.
The narrative turn. Provost downtown tells the history of oil cycles in architectural terms, if you know how to read it. The houses built during the 1970s boom are the largest ones on the best streets. The houses from the early 1990s bust show deferred maintenance, a sagging porch here, an unpainted fascia board there. The builds from the 2005 to 2015 super cycle have granite countertops and double-attached garages. When oil prices collapsed in 2015, Provost lost 12% of its population in 36 months. A Reddit user posting in r/Alberta wrote in 2022, "Bought a house in Provost for $67,000 in 2017 when everyone was leaving. 3 years later, oil prices recovered, workers started coming back, and my neighbor sold his identical house for $89,000. So I timed it right, I guess. The catch is, I had to actually live in Provost for 5 years while I waited to find out whether I timed it right."
The cruel irony is almost too clean to be true. Provost sits on top of billions of dollars of recoverable petroleum wealth. The people who have extracted that wealth, the petroleum engineers, the corporate executives, the shareholders, mostly live in Calgary, in houses worth more than some of the towns on this list combined. The people who stayed in Provost live in $70,000 houses and calibrate their decisions to the West Texas Intermediate price. Number 5, Grandview, Manitoba. 850 people, 350 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, on the southern edge of Duck Mountain Provincial Park. Average house price, $54,000. The town was settled in 1898 by families from Ontario, the United States, and Britain who arrived convinced, with the unearned confidence of the era, that this rolling parkland terrain would prove to be some of the finest agricultural land on the continent. It is not.
The narrative turn is institutional. Grandview lost its last functioning bank branch in 2019, not reduced to limited hours, gone. The nearest ATM is 45 kilometers away in Dauphin. By 2022, 24% of Manitoba rural communities with populations below 1,000 had no banking services within 20 years, closing 1,700 branches across the country between 2000 and 2023, as digital banking made physical presence seem optional to everyone except the customers who remained. One Grandview resident told CBC Manitoba, "I used to deposit a check in town on my way home from the field. Now I photograph it on my phone and pray the internet holds. If you're 80 and you don't use a smartphone, you drive 90 kilometers round trip to make a deposit. That's just Tuesday now."
The cruel irony close. Duck Mountain Provincial Park begins 6 kilometers from Grandview's downtown. It is one of the most biodiverse ecological zones in Western Canada. Old-growth forest, boreal wetlands, rare plant communities. A property in Grandview with a view of those ridgelines sells for $54,000. A comparable lot in Muskoka, Ontario, with a view of similar terrain, sells for $450,000. The ecology is nearly identical. The postal code is the difference. Number 4, LANIGAN, Saskatchewan. We are in the top 4, and the town I mentioned in the first 60 seconds of this video, the one with the $9,200 house, is next. But first, LANIGAN, Saskatchewan, which carries the most counterintuitive economic story on this entire list.
Population 1,300, located 120 kilometers southeast of Saskatoon, the closest to a major city of any place we've covered. Average house price, $41,500. LANIGAN should not be cheap. It sits 25 kilometers from one of the richest potash deposits on the surface of the Earth. The Mosaic potash mine at LANIGAN employs over 700 people. Canada produces 31% of the world's potash supply. Potash is the input that feeds the fertilizers, that feed the farms, that feed several billion people. The mine operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, regardless of weather or commodity cycle disruption, because the demand for agricultural nutrients is structurally inelastic. And yet, $41,500. A house in a town that sits beside an industrial asset of global economic significance costs less than a new half-ton truck.
Time stacking. LANIGAN was incorporated in 1904, the same year Henry Ford completed his first automobile, the same year construction began on the Panama Canal, 8 years before the Titanic sailed. The families who broke the soil here did it with horses and hand tools. Their grandchildren work in an automated underground mine that ships potash to Brazil, India, and China via rail. Every economic and technological context those original settlers understood has been replaced entirely. The town they left behind costs less than a year's rent in the city their great-grandchildren moved to. The narrative turn. Proximity to the mine does not drive housing demand in LANIGAN because the mine workers do not live in LANIGAN. They live in Saskatoon, 2 hours north, and commute. Or they live in Humboldt, 50 kilometers east. The mine is present. The economic gravity that should radiate outward from it in the form of housing demand and retail spending is not. The workers drive in, extract, and drive out.
Number 3, MINITONAS, Manitoba. 480 people, 520 kilometers north of Winnipeg, pressed into the Swan River Valley between Duck Mountain to the south and the Porcupine Hills to the north. Average house price, $24,500.
Minitonas is the most remote town on this list. The valley itself is narrow, a strip of agricultural land that exists because 2 ranges of hills channel the drainage in a way that keeps the soil wetter and richer than the surrounding boreal country. The Federal Land Survey of the 1890s classified it as marginal agricultural territory, which was the official phrasing for land that would grow food, but only if the farmer worked harder than the ones farming the better land to the south. Average household income in Minitonas, $43,000. Average house price, $24,500. The house costs 6 months of gross income. In the rest of Canada, the average house costs over 10 years of median household income. The narrative turn. Minitonas had, until 1978, a working lumber mill that employed 120 people in a town that has never before or since held more than 800 residents. The Swan River Valley had substantial accessible timber.
And this is worth understanding as something other than stubbornness. A woman who writes a rural Manitoba blog described it this way: Minitonas is a place where the community is the economy. The people who stay have decided that the community itself, the neighbors, the rink, the fall supper at the hall, is worth more than a job market. You make your own work. You farm a bit, do some construction, pick up a seasonal contract. It is not for everyone. The ones who make it work really make it work. The trade-off, stated plainly, $24,500 for a house. The nearest hospital with surgical capacity is 65 kilometers away in Swan River. The nearest emergency room is 65 kilometers. The nearest Canadian Tire, 65 kilometers. The nearest Tim Hortons, and in Canada, this is not a trivial cultural metric, 65 kilometers.
you are making a choice about how far you are willing to travel for everything in exchange for paying almost nothing for the place you come home to.
Number 2, ZENON Park, Saskatchewan. Population 220, located 190 kilometers northeast of Saskatoon. Average house price, $17,500. This is no longer cheap real estate in the conventional sense. This is a different category of thing. ZENON Park was founded in 1927 by French-Canadian settlers who had moved west from Quebec and Ontario in search of farmland in the late homesteading wave. They built a Catholic church and named their community after Father Zenon Beliveau, a local oblate priest. The town has been predominantly Francophone ever since, a linguistic island in the middle of an Anglophone prairie, operating in French in a province where French is spoken by fewer than 2% of the population. At its demographic peak in 1951, ZENON Park held 680 residents. Today, 220, a 68% decline in 7 decades.
The narrative turn is not about decline. It is about the mechanism that slowed it. ZENON Park's French-Canadian character, which is the town's most distinctive feature, its primary difference from every other small prairie community on this list, is also the reason anything is still here. The community maintained a caisse populaire, the Quebec credit union tradition, which kept local financial transactions circulating within the community rather than draining to Regina or Saskatoon bank branches. More critically, the French language school. When enrollment dropped below the threshold that would trigger closure under provincial guidelines, enough families in ZENON Park made the deliberate choice to stay or to return, specifically to keep that school open. Because without it, the language disappears within a generation.
Why do they stay? A woman named Martine, quoted in a 2022 Radio Canada profile, said, "If we leave, the French is gone. This little piece of Quebec on the prairie, it disappears entirely. For my grandmother, who came from Abitibi, that would have been unthinkable. So we stay. We find ways." $17,500 for a house and the living archive of a culture refusing to be absorbed. The cruel irony. The French-Canadian settlers who came west in 1927 were in part fleeing the cultural and economic dominance of English Canada in eastern cities. They built a Francophone sanctuary in Saskatchewan to preserve what they feared losing. Now, a century later, their grandchildren are fighting to keep that sanctuary from being erased by the same English Canada their great-grandparents were escaping. They moved 3,000 kilometers, and the problem followed them.
Number 1, ROCKGLEN, Saskatchewan. You were promised something extraordinary. Here it is. ROCKGLEN, Saskatchewan. Population 380. Located 220 kilometers south of Regina in the Killdeer Badlands near the American border. Average house price based on 2023 active MLS listings, $14,500. At a municipal tax auction held in ROCKGLEN in 2022, a legal proceeding held when property owners who have stopped paying taxes are finally cleared from municipal rolls, a 3-bedroom, 1,100 square foot house on a full lot sold for $9,200. The winning bidder drove up from Regina. He paid cash, same day. The bid was not contested. There was one bidder. $9,200. ROCKGLEN sits in a geological formation called the Killdeer Badlands, eroded coulees and clay hoodoos and dry creek beds that look nothing like the flat grain prairie most people imagine when they picture Saskatchewan. The terrain here is dramatic and disorienting. In summer, the Badlands glow ochre and rust, and the light at golden hour is something you do not forget. Time stacking, this land was occupied by the Lakota Sioux when the Northwest Mounted Police established their regional forts in 1874, 2 years before Custer's last stand 400 kilometers southeast of here, 23 years before the Klondike Gold Rush, 48 years before the discovery of insulin. When white settlers arrived in the 1910s, they found soil thin enough that the Dominion Land Survey explicitly flagged the area as marginal for homesteading. Here is the narrative turn, and it is the one that should stay with you longest. Over the past decade, ROCKGLEN has begun attracting a particular kind of migrant that no one in rural development policy predicted, and no one in the real estate industry has yet figured out how to market. Remote workers with laptops and Starlink dishes, artists who need space and silence more than they need a gallery district, retirees who have done the arithmetic on urban living and found it unsustainable. A retired teacher from Toronto told CBC Saskatchewan in 2022, "I sold a condo in Toronto for $780,000. I bought a house in ROCKGLEN for $13,000. I had $767,000 left over. I'm 58 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I am not worried about money. I am not counting how many more years I have to work. I am done." What you are looking at when you look at a $9,200 house in ROCKGLEN or a $17,500 house in ZENON Park is not primarily a failure of those communities. It is the residue of a policy. The Prairie Homesteading Program was the largest organized land settlement in the history of this continent. Over 600,000 families placed onto 160-acre parcels across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta between 1896 and 1930. The federal government needed those bodies on that land to assert sovereignty against American expansionism and convert indigenous territory into taxable property. It was a policy that required people. And when the economic rationale for those people disappeared, when farming mechanized, when oil centralized, when cities absorbed the young with the efficiency of a vacuum, the towns were left behind without apology or plan.
The houses are cheap because the bet didn't pay out. But something else is now also true. In a country where an entire generation has concluded that homeownership is structurally unavailable to them, these towns are offering a different proposition. Not for everyone. Not without trade-offs that would be genuinely intolerable for many people. But for those willing to drive 90 minutes to an airport, build their own work, and live among people who are there by choice rather than circumstance, these places are offering something Canadian cities stopped offering 20 years ago. Here is the question that stays with me after researching every entry on this list. Not could you live there, but what did you decide homeownership was actually for?
Drop a comment right now. Which of these 12 towns would you actually consider? And what's the price point that would genuinely change your mind about where you live? If this kind of deep dive into the Canada nobody covers is what you're looking for, subscribe, because this channel goes exactly where the mainstream coverage doesn't. See you in the next one.